So we want everybody to be able to have the ability to train as much as they feel like they can, but we want you to get the absolute most out of it so that you're not finding yourself in an overtrained state and in a position where that's going to hinder you long term by either limiting training or putting you in a position for potential injury. What we want to talk about today is going to be overtraining, and overtraining is going to be a pretty vague concept. It's something that I know as coaches we reference from time to time, more as a kind of a precautionary tale, just to make sure people are thinking about the things that they're doing, thinking about the value they're getting out of what they're doing in their training. And when we talk about training, of course, that can mean a lot of different things. Training doesn't specifically mean what are the things that you're doing within the context of a class, or anytime you come in the CrossFit classroom. Training is going to be effectively, whenever we reference that, anything that is perceived exertion. It's probably above like a 4 on a 1 to 10 scale. So if you go out for a jog with your dog, and you're going to be limited by the dog running from place to place and stopping and sniffing, that's probably not training. If you go out for a jog and preparation for, let's say, a 5K or a 10K, or it's something where you run, let's say, 3 to 5 miles and you end up sweaty, breathing a little bit heavily by the end of it, we're going to throw that into the bucket of training. So we want to put this together so that we can understand what are the signs of overtraining, what are the things that we can do to potentially combat that, and then just kind of understand what are the signs of that coming before it's actually something that's imminently upon you and you're having to suffer kind of the repercussions of what that means. So overtraining is generally going to be training beyond what your body's ability to recover will be. That's going to be something that's going to have a different scale for every single person. It's going to be relative to your age as well as your training age. So it's going to be how long have you been training in a very intentional way. For some people, they started bench pressing and doing sit-ups whenever they were in high school playing football, started doing push-ups and box jumps when they were playing volleyball, all of these sort of things. And then other people didn't actually start training until they were in their late 30s, let's say, and they realized they were putting on a little bit of weight that they didn't want to have. So their training age is going to be very young, even though their body is older. So it's understanding how long have you actually been training, usually with some type of resistance training or body weight training, and then your actual age, and then understanding how does your body recover based upon either traumatic events, there's other stressors that you have in your life, and how do those things impact your ability to recover from training. The way that to kind of think about this is to think about, I think, number one, what are the things that give you the ability to recover? So what does your food look like? Your consistency with eating on a regular schedule, eating the proper amount of food for your activity level, for the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. What does your sleep like? How much sleep are you getting? How consistent is that sleep? Are you sleeping through the night? Are you having difficulty sleeping, waking up several times? And then what does your home life, work life, all that sort of stuff look like as we think about a balance between those things? If you're someone who's working, let's say 12 to 14 hours a day where you're on your feet, you're working with clients, you're on the phone, you're traveling a lot, that's going to limit your ability to train. If you want to get the most out of your training possible, you can definitely layer on top of that. But from the perspective of someone who wants to see someone get the most out of what they're investing, it's probably something we want to limit in that regard. So let's take all those things into consideration, and then the more time that you're sort of thinking about, I don't get much sleep, I'm having trouble eating properly, I spend a lot of time stressing at work, then we need to cut back on what your training is. And again, that's going to be a scale that's going to vary from one person to the next. And I think if you go to the IN3 website or just Google Jason Phillips and go to his blog, he posted a really good article yesterday about this. And it's basically, you want to take, and this will reference some stuff we talked about before on the podcast, you want to make 2 columns. On the left side, you want to make a column for what we'll call sympathetic, and then on the right side, we want to make a column for parasympathetic. And so all the things that stress you out in life, you put in this column on the left side, and that's going to be effectively anything that stresses you out. And in that column, you want to give it a scale from 1 to 10. So if going home and you've got kids at home, you've got responsibility there, you've got a lot of stuff going on, and every time you go home, you just immediately feel tension ratchet up, that's probably going to be somewhere close to 10 on that scale. If you have to mow the lawn every week and it's something that, it's kind of a pain, but you don't really mind to do it, it's just something you've added on, it's probably lower on that scale, 2, 3, something like that. So everything that stresses you out in life, left side of the scale for the sympathetic side, right side, everything that makes you excited, everything that makes you happy, everything that sort of calms you out, put that on the right side. And again, we're numbering that 1 to 10. So if listening to music makes you excited, whether that's looking for new music, listening to things that you enjoy, it just puts you in a more calm and relaxed state, let's put that on that scale. Eating in a lot of cases is going to be something that gives you the ability to cool out, relax, that sort of stuff. Training, all of these sort of things, watching Netflix with significant others, partners, all that sort of stuff. So again, we're trying to make a list on the right side, and what we want to do is we want to tally those two numbers up and look at what does the stress number look like, and what does the sympathetic side look like, and then what does the relaxing or the parasympathetic side look like. And in most cases, you're going to end up with that sympathetic side being a number that's much higher. So the higher that number is in relation to the number on the right side that's going to cool us out, relax us, is probably the less training that we need to do until we can find balance there. Whether that's we find a way to bring those numbers down on the stressful side, whether that's removing some of those things that are stressful, whether that's taking additional responsibility outside of work, whether that is stuff that you just know you don't necessarily have to do or you don't have to invest as much time in. Let's try to pull that back a little bit. But that gives us kind of a framework for balancing. Should we be training more? Should we take advantage of extra time that we have? Or should we be finding more ways to increase that parasympathetic side or that ability to relax? So do that is just basically a starting point to find out where are we on that particular spectrum. So that gives us an idea of how much training can we do. So if you've got way more on the parasympathetic side where you've got the ability to get yourself a good amount of sleep, get yourself a good amount of food, get yourself into a position where at work it's not going to be as stressful, home life's not as stressful, then we can start adding training time onto what we're doing with what is kind of our baseline training is. So with that in mind, we want to talk about, just sort of what does that additional training look like? Should I be doing more strength work if I find that strength is a weakness? Should I be doing more gymnastics if I have trouble with, let's say, handstand walking that we saw in the Open this year? Should I be doing some other types of mobility, stretching, all of those sort of protocols to put us in better positions? And again, this is going to be relative to what your ability is. But what I would tell you is if you have the ability to spend some devoted time on strength training, then you probably want to cut back on what some of your Metcons are to begin with, just so that way you have the ability to kind of prioritize that strength. And it's not that we can't do these things concurrently. It's just if that's something that you see as a weakness, then let's focus on what that strength training is, cut back on class. Maybe we do a strength cycle where we're spending some time in just a bench press, deadlift, strict press, and then accessory type of workout setting, curls, pullovers, skull crushers, all those sort of things. And then we are doing class 2 or 3 times a week. So that way we're still looking at that kind of 5-day per week training. If you find out that you're not having any additional difficulty recovering, then let's put some Metcons back in. And, at that point we want to look at what does sleep look like, and is my digestion good, all of those sort of factors. If that still looks good at that point, then let's add in another, let's say, 30-minute session, whether that session is spent with active recovery like we talked about before, some specific recovery or mobility type stuff like we talked about previously as well, or we start doing some very low intensity accessory type work. So that's going to be like if we're doing gymnastics as a focus, and that's going to be us doing Static holds, that's going to be us doing isometrics, things like holding the bottom of a push-up for 30 seconds, resting for 30 seconds, doing that for 10 rounds. That way we're thinking about what does our shoulder girdle look like, what does the range of motion in our pecs look like, but we're creating that isometric stability at the end range when we're thinking about dips, when we're thinking about muscle ups, all those sort of things. We're talking about planks, we're talking about hollow body positions, arch holds, all of that sort of stuff. So we want these things to be low intensity, and then as you get comfortable with those, then we turn those very low intensity kind of static movements into dynamic movements. So once we kind of nail that down, let's layer that and let's start thinking about adding, we'll stay with the gymnastics example here, let's start thinking about adding in arch and hollow kips on a bar, turning that into kind of skill work on kipping pull-ups, butterfly pull-ups, ring swings into muscle-ups. We always want to start this from kind of the ground level and build versus saying, hey, I want to come in and work on muscle-ups, so I'm going to jump on the rings and swing around a few times, make a couple of attempts, have some difficulty, get frustrated, and then move on. We want this to be very focused, very intentional work with what we're doing. So that allows your nervous system the time and the necessary volume to become adapted to the more work that you're doing, and it gives your body time to understand how to recover from that versus just coming in saying, hey, I should do another day of class during the week. Hey, I should do day of class and open gym another day of the week. So we want to really smartly put this together. And the way that you kind of want to think about that is, let's say that you were looking to pursue kind of a secondary profession or a second job, or you're looking to pick up some new skill. You wouldn't just go in and to wherever that might be. Let's say that you're going into a position where you're looking to do, let's say, graphic design work, and your background is in accounting. If you've never had any background in graphic design, you're not going to walk into an agency and say, hey, I saw that you've got a graphic design position open. I want to do that job. And they're going to say, well, what's your background? You say, well, I have none. They're not going to put you into that position because you're not adapted to do that. You don't have the skill necessary to do that. It's the same thing here. You don't want to put yourself into a position where you're either not going to succeed or you don't have the foundational skills necessary to progress forward, whether that's strength, whether that is gymnastics, or whether that's skill work. Probably one of the things that we'll see most often is people coming in and they're doing double under practice. Double under practice is something where you can really fry out your central nervous system because you're just jumping over and over and over and over again. You're putting a lot of strain on your upper body, getting tense, holding onto a rope, and you're putting a lot of strain on your lower body with just kind of that jumping, that repetitive action, that sort of thing. And then your brain just gets fried trying to think about what's this little thing that I can do or I can change to make double unders better. In a lot of cases, some of the foundational things that you can do is just make an X on the ground, jump up and down on that X, make sure you're jumping on that X 50 times, 75 times, 100 times. If you can do that, you're creating that muscle endurance that's required for your lower body to handle doing double unders. Instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to do this new skill, you're creating the foundation there. From that point, one of the things that I give people as an example is they can either take like an old rope that they have, cut it in two, that way you've got a handle in both hands and you've got a rope, and then you have that rope so that it's not going to hit you. It's split up into two pieces, and you can work on kind of the repetition of turning your wrists, understanding the foundational components of the double under. And then from that point, most often what we'll see in the way that a lot of people end up kind of working on double unders is doing a single under, double under, single under, double under, starting to develop that rhythm. And then you just kind of, again, increase the volume and the intensity of that until you can do it. And then you start doing it rather than saying, hey, I want to do as many double unders as I can, and then I'm going to just fail. Give yourself the opportunity to succeed and say, hey, I'm going to do 5 double unders and I'm going to stop. I'm going to rest. I'm going to do 5 double unders. I'm going to stop. I'm going to rest. That way you're reinforcing good habits. You're reinforcing succeeding from a mental perspective, and you're putting yourself in a position where you're not going to physically drain yourself. You're not going to create bad habits when it comes to that skill, and you're adding volume into your training where you're increasing muscle endurance, you're increasing aerobic capacity, and you're increasing your ability to functionally move as it comes to a workout later. So in a lot of ways, there's several different ways that you can approach this, but it's just understanding what are those things. So volume is one of the things that we'll see most often people wanting to do more of. What we want to do is we want to kind of approach that just from a stair-step perspective of increasing 30 minutes in a given week, then increase an hour in a given week. And that might be 15 minutes over the course of 4 class sessions. That might be 30 minutes to an hour of just you coming in and working on a day that you would typically take off. But we don't want to increase that and say, hey, we're going to do an hour and a half to 2 hours additional every single day, and then just let that sort of drain our bodies to the point where we can't have the ability to train and do the things that we would typically do, which puts us into a much more stressed out state, puts us in a position where we're going to potentially create injury and all the sort of negative effects. So that's just kind of the approach to it, and the signs that kind of come along with when you're overtraining are usually going to be understanding what comes along with focus, so mental clarity, what comes along with what does your body feel like, and understanding how to discern between whenever you're in pain or whenever it's discomfort. That's something that Ben Bergeron says pretty frequently, and I adapt and talk to a lot with people whenever they tell me that they're hurting or they're in pain. It's just, are you actually in pain? Are you hurting? Or are you uncomfortable right now? Or is it discomfort that you're feeling? Because as humans, our body's made to be able to withstand discomfort for a very, very long period of time. You can look at the Boston Marathon for this year and just the conditions that they were in, the people who were running in that and ran for hours on end. That is discomfort. That's not hurting. That's not pain. That's just a situation that you wouldn't necessarily choose to be in, but it's something that you can withstand for a very long period of time. So it's just naturally within our nature to be able to withstand discomfort. And that's what we want to be able to understand whenever it comes to training as well. If you're in the middle of a workout and it's getting harder to breathe and your muscles are getting tired, that's not you going to, let's say, the pain cave. That's you just being in a lot of discomfort. And that's very different than you waking up in the morning and as soon as you move your shoulder, you feel a sensation just kind of sear through your arm, runs up into your spinal column and then hits your brain, and you're just like, what is that? That's a sign that something else is going on. That's a malfunction somewhere else along that spectrum. And we want to be able to discern what are those two things. If you wake up in the morning and you're stiff and it takes a minute to get your shoulder kind of moving, but as soon as it's moving, then you're okay, that's discomfort. If you wake up in the morning and your knee hurts, and as soon as you start to go down the steps, you have to take it one step at a time because you have to keep as little pressure on that knee as possible, because as soon as it starts to flex, you feel pain run down your shin or run up toward your hip. That's a problem of something else. And in a lot of cases, that's just going to be training beyond what your body allows you to recover from. So you just have to be able to understand what does that mean for you on an individual basis. And what's the difference between soreness as it comes to muscle soreness and that being a kind of a byproduct of growth and muscle gain or strength gain, and then what is pain as well. A lot of times soreness comes from a muscular perspective. It's not something where it's like, oh yeah, my knee hurts, and as soon as I get it warmed up, it doesn't hurt anymore, but then as soon as I stop, it just kind of tightens up. That's a different thing. Soreness is going to be, yeah, it feels like I can't reach in range on extending my arm because I did curls for the first time in 6 months yesterday, versus me saying, yeah, that's pain in my elbow whenever I reach full extension on my arm, or if I come all the way back into flexion on my arm, I still feel that pain in my elbow. That's a different thing, and that's something where we would want to cut back on the volume, allow your body time to recover, whether that's a recovery process we talked about, whether it's icing, whatever it might be. We just want to understand what is the difference between those two particular things as it comes to overtraining. So knowing how to read what your body's telling you gives you the ability to understand how often you should be training and whether you should be on a consistent schedule, or if you should just intuitively listen to when does your body need to train. Most often what we see, so what's recommended as far as like CrossFit goes, is 3 days on, 1 day off. With all the studies and everything that they did whenever they were initially putting together kind of the philosophy, that's what they saw worked. But that doesn't mean that it works for every single person. Just like everything that's programmed in class on a given day is maybe not the right answer for every single person, we want to be able to listen to what is going on with your body. And I actually had this conversation with client yesterday who was talking to me about training, and she said, speaking to me, she said, whenever you're hurting or you wake up and you're just not feeling like training, do you train? And I said, no, I don't. And that kind of goes against the idea of just get in, grind. That's when you make the biggest changes and that sort of stuff. For me, I've been training long enough, played sports long enough that I know if I'm getting that signal, that means I shouldn't train. Because I wake up every day, I feel pretty good. I know that whatever I'm doing, I feel good about it and I'm excited to do it. So anytime that I'm feeling different than that, it means something else is going on and my body's telling me something. So I have to have the ability to understand that whenever I'm feeling that, and I have to be willing to say like it's a good idea for me not to train, that I can follow through on that. So, same kind of thing. You initially want to either think about this as saying, hey, I want to work out Monday through Friday, take the weekends off. That's cool. If you find out every single week whenever you do that, by the time Thursday hits, you're sore, you're hurting, you wake up and say, I don't really want to go into the gym today, maybe not a schedule that we should be following. Maybe we go Monday, Tuesday, take Wednesday off, see how you feel on Thursday that particular week. Or what you'll see pretty frequently if you're looking at kind of like blog programming or programming that's posted on the internet on different sites, you'll see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on, Thursday off, Friday, Saturday on, Sunday off. And that generally fits with a lot of people's schedules, but same kind of thing. Just because something says for you to do that doesn't mean that it's the right answer for you individually. These things are being written for a very broad base, a very wide number of people, and you want to be able to understand what does your body need. Whether that's talking to a coach, figuring out what does that schedule look like, whether that is kind of listening to or keeping track of what are the signals of what do I feel on a particular day. If you're feeling mental fog, lack of clarity, if you're feeling physical, just like you're physically drained and you don't have the ability to go in and train, but you're doing it anyways, that's something that we want to be aware of and something we want to learn to cater through recovery or just giving yourself the ability to rest between there. A lot of times you'll see people who will talk about, let's say that it's Tim Ferriss and all of his 4-hour books. So he's got the 4-hour workout. So you're working out 4 hours in a given week. If you think about that, there's a lot of value in that because you're thinking about very intentional work for 4 hours versus you coming in. Let's say you come in 10 minutes late to class, you don't really take time to warm up, you do whatever the pieces are that are written that day, some of it at least, and then you do the Metcon, and then you leave before the cool down's done. So that's you working out 35 to 40 minutes, and you do that 5 days a week, so that's going to be a little bit over 3 hours of training. But that's not, in my opinion, that's not going to be very intentional work that you're doing. You're not getting the value out of those 3 hours because you're not properly warming your body up, you're not going through the movements with intent, and you're not executing to the best of your ability because you're either rushing through that or your mind's somewhere else. If you can block off the time to work out 45 minutes a day for, I guess that would be 5 to 6 days a week, and you're very intentional about it, that's going to bring you a lot more value than coming into class, not spending the time that you should on those different pieces and getting the most out of it. So understand what your schedule is. Don't force a schedule into what you have that's available. Let what you have available dictate what you're doing because it's going to eliminate stress. It's going to give your body a better rhythm, and it's going to give you a better understanding of how to properly set your day up so that you can succeed in these ways. So understand that from an overtraining perspective. Rest is important. It's critical. It's something everybody should be doing. For me personally, that looks like basically 2 days a week. 1 day a week, I'm basically not really doing anything physical other than maybe hiking, walking dogs, something like that. The other day is going to be very, very low intensity skill work or very, very low intensity blood moving type work where I'm walking, running, rowing, on a bike, on a ski erg, whatever that might be, but at a very, very reduced intensity just to encourage blood flow through my body. It's not me increasing my aerobic capacity. Though that's a little bit of what's happening because blood flow helps with that, but it's not me being intentional saying, hey, I'm doing 5 minutes on the rower, I'm resting 5 minutes on max capacity on all of these different implements. It's just me listening and saying, what do I need to work on? What does my body feel like? And then going from there. So a lot of this is going to be you understanding who you are as an individual and then taking that and implementing it in different ways. Your first try at figuring out what that schedule looks like, what that additional strength piece looks like may not make sense. So be willing to adapt that. Don't look at a schedule and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing and I'm going to stick with that. If it doesn't make sense and it doesn't feel right and you're physically having issues with it, let's adapt that, let's modify that, let's turn it into something that makes sense for you, or rearrange the schedule or what you have in front of you so that you have the ability to get the most out of it. So we want everybody to be able to have the ability to train as much as they feel like they can, but we want you to get the absolute most out of it so that you're not finding yourself in an overtrained state and in a position where that's going to hinder you long term by either limiting training or putting you in a position for potential injury. So as I mentioned early on, if you have any questions about this, feel free to talk to a coach because we want to help you understand that, potentially help you understand how to increase your training if that's something that you want to do and you want to pick up new skills and those sort of things, instead of just coming in and blindly saying, hey, here's what I want to do, and then potentially ending up with some negative effects afterwards. But as I said, you don't have to talk to a coach about it. Just be smart about how you're approaching it and understand that it's going to be something that does take time just to allow yourself to adapt to what you're now doing. So give yourself some leeway and some freedom to make those decisions and get the absolute most you can out of your training, so that way you have the ability to do this in a long-term capacity and have the longevity to allow your body to do that, so that we're not in kind of those stressful states that we want to stay away from as much as we possibly can.